Alright, I'm going to make this video on the question of, are Christians supposed to protest the government, right? Are they supposed to fight against it, bear arms, right? Are they supposed to listen to the American Constitution and, overthrow a tyrannical government? Well, the answer is no, and you can see this very plainly in Scripture that we are supposed to be subject to the higher powers. We're not supposed to resist them because they are ordained by God to punish us because we broke the Ten Commandments. And they definitely are doing some wicked things, I will not deny that, but it is not our job to speak evil against them. Our job is to rebuke the sin in the church, not out of the heathen government. Okay, so I'm going to go straight into Scripture here to show this idea being portrayed. Okay, so Romans chapter 13, verses 1 to 7. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, taxes, for they are God's ministers attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Right? So the point is that all authority is ordained by God. This wouldn't be happening if God didn't allow it to. Okay? And the government is, in fact, run by Satan, but that is to punish us for doing wicked deeds ourselves. We break the holy covenant like the Sabbath day, right? That's on Saturday from sunrise to sunrise, okay? And for doing pagan holidays like Christmas and Easter, right? All that stuff has nothing to do with the Messiah's actual birthday and resurrection. It's all paganism that was introduced by Rome in the 4th century, and God abhors all that stuff. And because we are going after these other gods, serving them with these pagan holidays and not keeping his commandments, well, he's going to use the government to punish us and do wicked things to us, like poisoning our food, giving us the vaccines, all that stuff, okay? And we're not supposed to speak evil against them because that's our punishment. It's a reflection of our own wickedness. And I'm going to show this also in the Old Testament because Paul isn't just pulling this out of nowhere. He's quoting the prophets and the Torah, okay? Because God is unchanging and this is how he operates. So I'm going to read from Leviticus 26 here. So Leviticus 26, and this is a really good chapter. You should really read this whole thing. It's all about the blessings if you obey the Holy Covenant and curses if you disobey. All right, so if you disobey, that's what we're going to read here. Leviticus 26, verses 14 to 17. But if ye will not hearken unto me, and will not do all these commandments, and if ye shall despise my statutes, which means you don't keep them, or if your soul abhor my judgments, so that ye will not do all my commandments, but that ye break my covenant, I also will do this unto you. I will even appoint over you terror, consumption, and the burning ague, that shall consume the eyes, and cause sorrow of heart. And ye shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. And I will set my face against you, and ye shall be slain before your enemies. They that hate you shall reign over you, and ye shall flee when none pursueth you. Okay, so this is exactly what we see happening in America today. They that hate you shall reign over you, and this is a direct consequence, according to the Bible, of us breaking the Holy Covenant. So if you want things to be better, if you want this curse to be reversed, don't go speaking against your punishment. Speak against the sin that is causing the punishment. Tell people to stop doing pagan holidays. Stop breaking the Sabbath day. Stop breaking God's other commandments. He has dietary laws, You can't eat unclean things like pigs and shellfish, right? So if you're doing all these sins, but then you're complaining about the punishment, well, that's completely nonsensical. You got to go to the root of the issue, which is sin. Judge the cause of the fatherless and the widow, the Bible also tells you, which also is sin. If you keep going in this chapter, there are some very severe and harsh punishments if you just continue to stick your heels in the sand and refuse to return back to the Holy Covenant. It's not something that you want to be experiencing. So speak against the cause of the sin, not the actual punishment. Or sorry, the sin that causes the punishment, not the actual punishment. Right? So now I want to go to 1 Corinthians 5, because this is where Paul says, basically, don't judge outsiders, judge those in the church. So 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 12 to 13 says, "For what have I to do to judge them also that are without the church?" That's what he's speaking about. "Do not ye judge them that are within?" So we are supposed to judge the people in the church by rebuking their sin, right? Verse 13, "But them that are without the church God judgeth. Therefore put away from among yourselves that wicked person." Right? So he's telling you, do not judge those that are outside the body of Christ, but judge those that are within. So you're not supposed to be speaking evil against the governing authorities in this country, many of whom aren't even believers. So, don't judge the heathen government, judge the sin that is causing the heathen government to be evil in the first place. Right? Acts chapter 23, Paul says this in the New Testament, right? It says, "And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall, for thou smitest, for sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law. And they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? Then said Paul, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written in the law, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people." Right? So Paul is quoting the law as evidence or for a reasoning why he's not supposed to be speaking against this high priest here, because this is something that the Torah commands, right? Exodus 22, verse 28, "Thou shalt not revile the gods, nor curse the ruler of thy people." Okay, and the gods, that's just a title that can refer to several different things. Check Strong's Concordance, but it includes the judges, right? The people who are ruling the country. So you're not supposed to speak evil against them, or you're going to receive to yourself damnation, as Paul says in Romans chapter 13. Right? So now I want to go to Amos. So Amos chapter 5, verse 12 to 15, that's what I'm going to read here. And this is basically saying that the wise people, the prudent, they're going to keep silence. They're not going to speak against the government, but they're going to be rebuking the sin in the church. They're going to be rebuking in the gate. So it says in verse 12, "For I know your manifold transgressions and your mighty sins. They afflict the just, they take a bribe, and they turn aside the poor in the gate from their right." Right? So there's a lot of corruption going up in the higher up positions, but therefore the prudent shall keep silence in that time, for it is an evil time. Right? They're not going to bring an accusation against themselves from the devil by speaking evil against what he has set up as punishment for us from God. Verse 14, "Seek good and not evil, that ye may live. And so Jehovah, the God of hosts, shall be with you, as ye have spoken. Hate the evil and love the good, and establish judgment in the gate." Right? Mark 14. He has the porter in the gate. He commands him to watch. And what he says to the porter, he says unto all, watch. So be a watchman. Warn people to repent from their sins in the body of God's people, instead of speaking evil against the government. Warn them of their sins so that they can be saved and they can receive salvation. "It may be that Jehovah, God of hosts, will be gracious unto the remnant of Joseph." Right? In Joseph, he had two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. That is the USA and Great Britain. USA is the multitude of nations within a nation. Ephraim, right, who is the younger brother but receives the firstborn blessing, becomes greater than his older brother Britain, or Manasseh, who is also great. Okay, so Ephraim, that is USA, they're going to be very prideful. This is what Isaiah 28 says. Their glorious beauty is a fading flower, though. So woe to the drunkards of Ephraim, right? And then they try to go to the Egyptian and the Assyrian for their strength instead of returning back to God, right? Some of you guys even like to use, like, oh, go Donald Trump, or, go whoever, right? A politician, instead of trusting in God, Okay, so no, you obey those who are put over you. You don't resist them, right? So Trump isn't going to drain the swamp or whatever, right? He's established by God to punish wicked doers, and you should listen to him unless he tells you to break any of God's commandments. And that's something I'm going to get into a bit later, which is some of the exceptions for where you are not supposed to obey the governing authorities. And the only one really is when they tell you to do something contrary to God's law. Okay, and that's a test for us. Okay, but I'll get into that later, like I said. I'll keep going with some of these examples that show we are generally supposed to obey those who rule over us. So Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verses 2 to 5 says, I counsel thee to keep the king's commandment, and that in regard of the oath of God. Be not hasty to go out of his sight, stand not in an evil thing, for he doeth whatsoever pleaseth him. Where the word of a king is, there is power, and who may say unto him, What doest thou? Whoso keepeth the commandment shall feel no evil thing, and a wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment. Right, so the word of the king has power, and he can do whatever he pleases. So Solomon advises us, don't just go judging them or doing anything foolish in their sight, right? So be wise, okay? Be wise as a serpent and harmless as doves. That's something I'll bring up later as well. Okay, so Titus chapter 2, starting verse 15, these things speak and exhort and rebuke with all authority. Let no man despise thee. Chapter 3, put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work, to speak evil of no man, to be no brawlers, but gentle, showing all meekness unto all men. Right? So speak evil of no man, so definitely not against this king who has power and can do whatsoever he pleases in his own sight. Right? So now I want to go to Jeremiah chapter 27. All right, and this is a really good chapter where basically God is calling the king of Babylon his servant, and he commands his people to go and serve him. So this is why Paul is saying that they are God's ministers. This is why he knows, at least part of the reason why he knows, that God is the one who ordains governments and kings and rulers, right? So I'm going to read it, Jeremiah chapter 27, not all of it, but it says, In the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, came this word unto Jeremiah from Jehovah, saying, Thus saith Jehovah to me, Make thee bonds and yokes, and put them upon thy neck, and send them to the king of Edom, and to the king of Moab, and to the king of the Ammonites, and to the king of Tyrus, and to the king of Zidon, by the hand of the messengers which come to Jerusalem unto Zedekiah king of Judah, and command them to say unto their masters, Thus saith Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel, Thus shall ye say unto your masters, I have made the earth, the man and the beast that are upon the ground, by my great power and by my outstretched arm, and have given it unto whom it seemed meet unto me. And meet means like suitable. And now have I given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and the beasts of the field have I given him also to serve him. And all nations shall serve him, and his son, and his son's son, until the very time of his land come, and then many nations and great kings shall serve themselves of him. So God is the one who ordains kings. He's the one who raises them up and takes them down as it seems beneficial to his plan. Right? So Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, is God's servant, and he's executing judgment upon evildoers according to God's law. Right? And it shall come to pass that the nation and kingdom which will not serve the same Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and that will not put their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, that nation will I punish, saith Jehovah, with the sword, and with the famine, and with the pestilence, until I have consumed them by his hand. So he's using the king of Babylon to punish the nations that will not submit themselves to him. Therefore hearken not ye to your prophets, these are false prophets, nor to your diviners, nor to your dreamers, nor to your enchanters, nor to your sorcerers, which speak unto you, saying, Ye shall not serve the king of Babylon. For they prophesy a lie unto you, to remove you far from your land, that I should drive you out, and ye should perish. But the nations that bring their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, and serve him, those will I let remain still in their own land, saith Jehovah, and they shall till it and dwell therein. Right? So punishment for disobedience, and blessings if you obey. I spake also to Zedekiah king of Judah according to all these words, saying, Bring your necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon, and serve him in all and his people, and live. Why will ye die, thou and thy people, by the sword, by the famine, and by the pestilence, as Jehovah hath spoken against the nation that will not serve the king of Babylon? Therefore hearken not unto the words of the prophets that speak unto you, saying, Ye shall not serve the king of Babylon, for they prophesy a lie unto you. For I have not sent them, saith Jehovah, yet they prophesy a lie in my name, that I might drive you out, and that ye might perish, ye and the prophets that prophesy unto you. Also I spake to the priests and to all this people, saying, Thus saith Jehovah, Hearken not to the words of your prophets that prophesy unto you, saying, Behold, the vessels of Jehovah's house shall now shortly be brought again from Babylon, for they prophesy a lie unto you. Hearken not unto them, serve the king of Babylon, and live. Wherefore should this city be laid waste? Right? So very clear that the false prophets are telling you, do not obey the governing authorities, right? Do not listen to God here. The true prophets are telling you, submit to the governing authorities, right? Because they are God's servants, God's ministers to execute judgment on those that disobey God. Right? So next, I want to go back to the New Testament, because this is harder for people to deny. A lot of you Christians like to just completely ignore the Old Testament, even though Paul says that all Scripture is profitable for doctrine, reproof, correction, and instruction in righteousness in 2 Timothy chapter 3. But nevertheless, Matthew chapter 26, verse 52, and this is interesting because Peter, he tries to smite or cut off the ear of this high priest here that's trying to put Yeshua to death. Okay, so it says, Then said Yeshua unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Okay, so if you live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. So if you take it up, you try to fight against the Babylonian government, then you are going to be destroyed, right? And the Babylonian government, that represents the United States, because it is Babylon, right? USA, it's the hammer of the whole earth in the last days. It's the place that dwells upon many waters, so it can't be the Babylon from 2,000 plus years ago, right, that was landlocked, that was already destroyed when John was writing Revelation 17 and 18. But no, Babylon, that is the United States of America in the last days. Okay, so you're not supposed to resist them, their government, because that's not even your place, right? Leviticus 26, again, God gives you over to the captivity of the heathen government when you disobey him. So this isn't even supposed to be our home. If we would have obeyed God's commandments when we were in his land, we never would have been given over to this punishment. But we did get given over to this punishment. And so now we're not supposed to speak evil against it, right? So don't be doing that. God will return our captivity, bring us into the second Exodus. We have a heavenly kingdom. That is what we are supposed to be looking forward to. Babylon, USA, that's not our home. So don't fight by the sword to defend this nation, because it's not even supposed to be ours. It's going to pass away. It's going to fade. Okay, so Peter, he tries to smite him, this high priest, with the sword. And then John 18, verse 10 tells you that it's Simon Peter who does it. And I want to point that out because Peter actually learns from this mistake, unlike a lot of Christians. Okay? But just to read it, then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and smote the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Okay, so just to show that it is Peter, in fact, that did this. Okay, but then we go to 1 Peter, and let's hear what he has to say here. So 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 to 15. It says, Dearly beloved, I beseech you, as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul. So don't do the works of the flesh, like uncleanness, eating pork and shrimp, idolatry, witchcraft, your pagan celebrations like Christmas and Easter. Right? Having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, right? Because we are not Gentiles, we are grafted into the commonwealth of Israel, and we become spiritual Israelites. A Gentile is a heathen. It is somebody that is out of covenant, but we are dwelling in their land as punishment because we got scattered and kicked out of the land. All right, so they are Gentiles if they're out of covenant. They're outside the body, but those in the body, they are Abraham's seed. This is what Paul says in Galatians chapter 3, verse 29. That's why Ephraim is dwelling in Mystery Babylon. A lot of them are God's people. All right, so having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak evil against you, or speak against you as evildoers, they may buy your good works which they shall behold glorify God in the day of visitation. Okay, so he's basically telling you in this chapter, don't let any man suffer as an evildoer, or you will be rightly so punished, but let them suffer for the Messiah's name's sake. Okay, so don't go speaking evil against all their rulers, but be preaching the true gospel to people, which is the refreshing of the Holy Covenant, the 10 Commandments. We keep those to enter into the kingdom, right? Yeshua's blood allows us to be grafted into the commonwealth of Israel. So preach that. That is what you want to be persecuted for, and blessed are ye when that happens. That's what the Messiah says in Matthew chapter 5, verses 10 to 12, right? So that's what you want to be attacked by them for, not for actually doing something evil. So verse 13, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors, as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing ye may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. Right? So this is consistent all throughout the scriptures. God's governments, right, they're ordained to punish us, to punish evildoers. Right? And that's not necessarily just the evil of breaking the laws of the land, but the evil of breaking God's commandments. Right? So it may seem unjust to you, but you do not always see the full story, because God sees everything. Okay, so put to silence the ignorance of foolish men by only being able to have people find fault in you because you obey God rather than man, right? And that's not actual fault, but only fault in their eyes. And this is what Daniel did, and I'll get a little bit into that as well. So 2 Peter, showing that Peter, again, he did in fact learn from this. The first epistle shows that, don't fight against the government. But then 2 Peter chapter 2 also shows that Peter learned from his mistake. I'll start verse 10. But chiefly them, and this chapter, by the way, is all about the false prophets, but chiefly them that walk after the flesh in the lust of uncleanness and despise government, presumptuous are they. Self-willed, they are not afraid to speak evil of dignities. Whereas angels, which are greater in power and might, bring not railing accusations against them before the Lord. But these, as natural brute beasts, made to be taken and destroyed, speak evil of the things that they understand not, and shall utterly perish in their own corruption. Right? So if you're speaking evil against the government and you're despising it, then Peter calls you a brute beast. You're ignorant. You don't understand what you're saying, because these are ordained by God to punish you. You're ignorant of the Old Testament scriptures, all telling you that God is the one who ordains authority. So you are a brute beast if you want to speak evil against them and you don't actually look at yourself. Start by pointing the finger at yourself, seeing where my sin is, so that you can actually get these curses of these evil rulers reversed. Right? And then Jude says the same exact thing. Jude chapter 1, verses 8 to 10, likewise also these filthy dreamers defile the flesh, despise dominion, which means government, and speak evil of dignities. Yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, durst not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, the Lord rebuke thee. Right? If you speak evil against Satan and his government, well, that's how he's going to bring an accusation against you, because he is the accuser of the brethren. But he has been given all these governments by God as punishment for us. Verse 10, but these speak evil of those things which they know not, but what they know naturally, as brute beasts in those things they corrupt themselves. Right? So Jude says the same thing. And then Matthew 4, verses 8 to 9, just to show that Satan is the one who controls government, says, again, the devil taketh him up into an exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world, and the glory of them, and saith unto him, to Yeshua, all these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. So Satan has the power to give these things into the hand of whoever he chooses, okay? Because Satan is really like a rabid dog on a leash, right? God allows him to do evil things to us using the government, but only to the extent that God sees as suitable. Okay? And more on how they really just don't understand how they are speaking evil against God's ministers. We see this in Habakkuk chapter 1. And I really like this example because it says that they are being punished by people that are less righteous than they, and this is how it is ordained by God, because judgment must begin at the house of God, even if the house of God is more righteous than the people who are not in the house of God. So I'll read this here, and this is kind of hard to understand, especially with the Old English, but I'll explain it as best I can. So Habakkuk chapter 1, I'm going to start in verse 2. It says, O Jehovah, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. Okay, in the context of this is they have been taken captive by the Babylonians. Okay, and they're doing all these evil to them because most of them did not listen to God, right? And they did not go and serve the Babylonian king. So now they're getting punished by him as he promised would happen. So verse 3, Why dost thou show me iniquity, and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that rise up strife and contention. Therefore the law is slacked, and judgment doth never go forth, for the wicked doth compass about the righteous. Therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. Right? It seems like to him that wrong judgment goes forth because these evil people of the Babylonians, they are punishing God's people who are the ones who received the covenant and the law and, all the promises of God. Okay, but there's a purpose for this. We'll see as we go on. Behold ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously. Right? Among the heathen. That doesn't mean they are the heathen, but they're scattered amongst the heathen, as Deuteronomy 28 prophesied in Jeremiah 15. God's people are going to be scattered to every kingdom under heaven. So they're all over the world right now. And wonder marvelously, for I will work a work in your days, which ye will not believe, though it be told you. For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, and the Chaldeans are part of the Babylonians, right? That's who they are, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. Their horses also are swifter than leopards, and are more fierce than the evening wolves. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far. They shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat, and shall come all for violence. Their faces shall sup up as the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand. So they're a very ferocious nation, and this is God's wrath upon us. And they shall scoff at the kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. And they shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it. Then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing this his power unto his God. Art thou not from everlasting, O Jehovah my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die. O Jehovah, thou hast ordained them for judgment, and O mighty God, thou hast established them for correction. Right? So this is why God has put these evil people over them, to ordain them for correction, or ordain them for judgment, and to establish them for correction. Right? This is a punishment for us so that we return back from our evil ways and back to God's holy covenant. This is why the Babylonian government was raised up. Okay? So verse 13, Thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil, and canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he. Right? So Habakkuk, he's pleading with God, please do not let this punishment continue to go on, because these people are less righteous than the ones that they're punishing. Right? The Babylonians are less righteous than Israel, so why is it that you're letting this happen? And the answer is to punish them. So even if they're more wicked, you shouldn't just assume that this is some unjust thing because it is ordained by God. He judges his people first, then he judges the nations. Again, this is what 1 Peter chapter 4 says, and goes on to say that the righteous are scarcely saved. So you really shouldn't be trying to find an excuse for why you're not obeying God's ministers. Okay? We see this also in Psalm chapter 106, and this is really quoting a lot of stuff that happens in the book of Judges. Okay, so I'll read this. In verse 34, that's where I'll start here. So it says, They did not destroy the nations, talking about the Israelites, destroying the Canaanites, concerning whom Jehovah commanded them, but were mingled among the heathen, the nations, and learned their works. Big mistake. You're not supposed to learn the ways of the heathen. And they served their idols, which were a snare unto them. Yeah, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters unto devils, and shed innocent blood, even the blood of their sons and of their daughters, whom they sacrificed unto the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood. Thus were they defiled with their own works, and went a whoring with their own inventions. Therefore was the wrath of Jehovah kindled against his people, insomuch that he abhorred his own inheritance. So you are bringing the wrath of God upon you when you do idolatry, when you do Christmas, Easter, sun god day worship, instead of keeping his holy covenant. All that stuff is paganism. And he gave them into the hand of the heathen, and they that hated them ruled over them. Right? That is like a direct quote from Leviticus 26, verse 17. Right? They that hate you will rule over you if you do not keep his commandments, but you do the ways of the heathen instead. Jeremiah 10 says, learn not the way of the heathen. Right? Repent from Christmas if you want this stuff to be reversed. Their enemies also oppressed them, and they were brought into subjection under their hand. Many times did he deliver them through his judges, but they didn't listen to the judges, just like they don't listen to the watchmen, right? The people who enter into the work of the prophets today, but they mock them instead. But they provoked him with their counsel and were brought low for their iniquity, right? For your sins is the reason why you're being brought low and why you're few among the heathen right now, right? So we see this in Judges. Judges 2, verse 11, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of Jehovah and served Baalim. And they forsook Jehovah, God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods, of the gods of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked Jehovah to anger. And they forsook Jehovah, and served Baal and Ashtaroth. And that really is who you're serving as well if you're doing Christmas and Easter. Because Baal, well, that's the sun god. He was a weather god. December 25th, that was his birthday. It was all the birthdays of the sun gods because they thought that stuff, they thought that the winter solstice, the days getting longer, was the rebirth of the sun god. And they thought that Easter, or Astarte, or Ashtaroth, that was Ishtar, okay, that was the queen of heaven in their eyes. And that's what Easter is. You're making cakes to the queen of heaven, right? Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 18. And you're basically just using her fertility symbols of bunnies and eggs when you do these celebrations, and this is provoking God to anger. You're not sacrificing to him. Those feasts are food sacrificed to idols for pagan gods. Baal and Ashtaroth is just new names because Satan is crafty, right? But there's no new thing under the sun. So this is why all this evil is coming upon us, because you guys are serving other gods, and you're not serving the God of Jacob by keeping his Sabbath day, keeping his commandments. Right? So therefore, and the anger of Jehovah was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of spoilers that spoiled them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies round about, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. They fell. Whithersoever they went out, the hand of Jehovah was against them for evil, as Jehovah had said, and as Jehovah had sworn unto them, and they were greatly distressed. Right? So very clearly that when you serve idols, God brings evil upon you. It's a direct consequence. All right, so I want to go to 1 Samuel, and this is kind of a miscellaneous example, and then I'm going to get into a couple exceptions when you do not want to obey the government. But 1 Samuel chapter 24, verses 2 to 7, this is where David, he twice, I'm going to show the other example as well, he refuses to slay Saul because he knows that he can't be guiltless if he slays the Lord's anointed, the person who is ordained as ruler by God. So 1 Samuel 24, verse 2 to 7, then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. And he came to the sheepcotes by the way where was a cave, and Saul went in to cover his feet, which I'm pretty sure is just a euphemism for using the bathroom. And David and his men remained in the sides of the cave. And the men of David said unto him, Behold, the day of which Jehovah said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privily, right? So he does this secretly without Saul noticing, just to show that he could have killed him, but he did not. And it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him, because he had cut off Saul's skirt. And he said unto his men, Jehovah forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, Jehovah's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of Jehovah. So David stayed his servants with these words, which means he prevented them from doing what they wanted to do, to kill Saul, and suffered them not to rise against Saul. But Saul rose up out of the cave and went on his way. Okay, so he's basically making almost an oath in God's name, in Jehovah's name, saying, God forbid that I should do this evil thing in slaying the man who God has anointed. Right? He says the same thing in 1 Samuel 26, verses 7 to 11. So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and behold, Saul lay sleeping within the trench, and his spear stuck in the ground at his bolster. But Abner and the people lay round about him. Then said Abishai to David, God hath delivered thine enemy into thy hand this day. Now therefore let me smite him, I pray thee, with the spear, even to the earth at once, and I will not smite him the second time. And David said to Abishai, Destroy him not, for who can stretch forth his hand against Jehovah's anointed and be guiltless? And that's a rhetorical question. The answer is nobody, right? You can't slay God's ministers and then be guiltless. He will punish you for that. Right, so really you do not want to be rising up against the Babylonian government, trying to shoot your guns at them and protest and overthrow the tyranny and, whatever, right? That's not what you're commanded to do by God. So put the Constitution above God's word. He said, thou shalt not murder. Verse 10, David said, Furthermore, as Jehovah liveth, Jehovah shall smite him, right? God is the one who's going to judge him. Of his day shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish. Jehovah forbid that I should stretch forth mine hand against Jehovah's anointed, but I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is at his bolster and the cruse of water, and let us go. And again, he shows Saul how he could have killed him, but chose not to, right? Because David is more righteous than Saul. And even David represents the good servant and Saul the evil servant, right? For many reasons. But David, a man after God's own heart, he knew he was wise not to fight against God's ordained rulers. All right, so now I want to get into a couple exceptions, okay? Because obviously, if the government tells us to do something that is contrary to God's law, then that is the cutoff point. That is the point where we say, okay, we're going to serve God and not man, right? You see this in Acts chapter 4 when they're telling the apostles, basically, don't use the name of Yeshua, don't preach in that man's name. But it says, Acts 4 verse 19, But Peter and John answered and said unto them, Whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto God, judge ye. All right, so they're going to listen to God. Then it says more clearly, Acts chapter 5 verse 29, Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, We ought to obey God rather than men. Okay, and this is only the case when God, his law, contradicts what the people are telling you to do. Okay, so for example, let's say the government starts going evil as prophesied, and they start telling you to take the mark of the beast. Well, obviously, do not take the mark of the beast, right? Listen to God rather than man, okay? But just because they do evil there, that does not mean that you disobey all their other commandments, right? Just because they're telling you to take the mark of the beast doesn't mean you can go drink and drive and, evade your taxes and, right, do all kinds of other wickedness, okay? You're still supposed to obey every command that they give you, except the specific ones that prevent you from obeying God. All right, and another example that we've even seen in history was Constantine, right? In the 4th century, 321 AD, he enacted the Venerable Day of the Sun and forced people in his empire to rest on Sunday. And later, the Catholic Church basically said, you are not supposed to rest on the Sabbath day. Okay, and they persecuted people who rested on the Sabbath instead of the Lord's Day, which that's what they call it. It's a lie, which they called Sunday. Okay, but the righteous, those are the ones who disobeyed that Sunday commandment and kept the Sabbath on Saturday instead. And we do have recorded evidence that people were doing this, right? The Canon of Laodicea, the 4th century, it was Canon 29 of the Synod of Laodicea. Okay, so there were still Sabbath-keeping Christians that existed at that time, and they disobeyed Constantine and the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Empire, but they listened to God instead. This is the exception, okay? But just because they were enforcing the Sunday law, that doesn't mean you disobey their laws if they say, give up your weapons, right? Or if the government in America says, give up your guns, well, listen to them, because it's not a sin to give your guns to the government, right? So there are exceptions, but don't, go past what the exception allows, basically, is what I'm trying to get there. And really looking at Daniel is he is a great example of how to act when you're in captivity. Okay, Daniel, he didn't bow down to the gold idol, right? But he also obeyed the king of Babylon and didn't resist when he was thrown into the den of lions or other commandments of God, right? So he was still faithful to the king. He just didn't obey him when it contradicted God's laws. Right, and we see this in Daniel chapter 6, verses 3 to 5, how blameless Daniel was in the sight of the king of Babylon. Right, then Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault. Right, Daniel is putting to silence the ignorance of these foolish men. right? Because they're trying to find fault against him, but they can't. He's blameless because he's obeying the king of Babylon. He's not telling people, yeah, let's raise up arms against these evil Babylonians and, return back to the Holy Land. No, he understood that they were in captivity as punishment by God, and he was patiently waiting for God to return him, just obeying and being a good servant, right? So they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. And there it is. They couldn't persecute him for actually doing evil, so they tried to find a reason against him based on his obedience to his God rather than to the king of Babylon. And that's what they did, and that's why he was thrown into the den of lions. But because he was faithful in everything, well, God delivered him from the den of lions. And that's how we are supposed to be as well. We are supposed to be faithful. Don't just go resist the government because they do evil to you for righteousness' sake, but, be faithful to God, right? He will deliver you from evil until it is your time, right? And you might be a martyr, but not everyone's going to be. But blessed are ye if you are one. All right? So you really want to act like Daniel and his friends as well, right? They didn't worship the golden idol, so they were cast into the fire, but God saved them using his Son, right? The Son of God saves from the fire. But Matthew chapter 5, verse 39, this is basically what the Messiah says as well. But I say unto you that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Okay, so we aren't supposed to resist the evil that rulers do to us. We are supposed to have faith that God will deliver us, will not deliver us to death until it is our time, right? Most of the apostles died as martyrs. So the idea that we are to just raise up arms against the Babylonian government, USA government, it's just ridiculous, right? Daniel wasn't trying to overthrow Babylon. He patiently waited for God to restore Jerusalem and did his best to obey God while under the captivity of the heathen government. Now, I want to make this point clear as well. We still try to escape situations where we're going to be put to death, right? So we don't just try to get persecuted. Like Obadiah hiding the prophets from Jezebel in 1 Kings chapter 18 because she was trying to kill them all. And the disciples saving Paul by letting him down by the wall in a basket, right, to be saved from the Jews that were trying to kill him. But we are supposed to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves, right? That's Matthew 10, verse 16. So wise as serpent, right? So don't just blindly fall into their hand, right? Don't just let yourself be killed by them, right? But if they've got you and it's your time, be harmless as a dove, right? You're not supposed to fight against them or resist them because this is the test on God's servants, right? Some of them are going to die as martyrs, and you have to have faith that God will either deliver you or that he's doing this at his perfect timing. So don't be unfaithful. Don't try to just resist the government. But that's the point I'm trying to get across here. There's some additional scriptures I'll put in the description. But yeah, don't disobey your government. They're ordained by God to punish you because you broke the 10 commandments. And, you're not supposed to fight against them. Fight against the the sin that's causing the punishment in the first place. So that's what you need to be doing. And the only exception is when they make you do something that is contrary to God's law. So I'll end it here, but hopefully that got the point across clearly. Fear God and the king. That's what it tells you. So don't be someone who is a brute beast. Don't be foolish that just speaks evil of things that they know not.